Wind swept across the dying town of Dry Creek like a restless spirit, hurling dust against the half-built chapel that stood crooked against the night sky. The bell above never rang, it hadn't worked in years. But the people came anyway, drawn by obligation or fear, not faith. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. Candles guttered against the draft, their flames bending toward the cracked windows where rain threatened to burst through. The preacher's voice trembled as he read the vows, though it wasn't age that shook him. It was dread. Everyone in town knew this wasn't a wedding. It was a transaction. Eleanor Grange stood at the altar, hands trembling around a wilted bouquet. The white of her dress looked gray under the dim light, her veil clinging to her wet cheeks. Across from her, Wade Collier grinned, the kind of grin that never reached his eyes. The richest man's son for miles around, he was born into cruelty the way others were born into faith. His boots gleamed like oiled obsidian, spurs sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Do you?" "Miss Grange," the preacher stammered. "Take this man." "I do," Eleanor whispered, the words falling dead before they reached the pews. Wade's voice followed, strong and careless. "Course I do," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, as if mocking the sanctity of the moment. Among the onlookers stood Jonas Red, a tall, broad-shouldered man with the weariness of too many roads behind him. His face was shadowed under the brim of a rain-stained hat, the scar along his jaw catching the candlelight. He didn't belong here, but something had pulled him back to Dry Creek, the kind of pull that came from unfinished debts. He'd heard whispers of the wedding on the trail and hadn't believed them. Not until now. The preacher's final words wavered. "By the power vested in me." Outside, thunder cracked so hard it rattled the glass. Rain began to fall in long silver streaks, washing the dust from the chapel steps. Wade turned toward Eleanor, gripping her wrist as if she might vanish. "You're mine now," he muttered, voice rough with whiskey and pride. "Bought and branded." Then he yanked her veil up and kissed her, not like a man taking a wife, but like a conqueror claiming spoils. The crowd gave a hesitant, awkward applause. Some looked down at their boots. Others forced smiles. The preacher closed his Bible with a snap, his hands shaking. Jonas stood motionless, every muscle tight. His eyes met Eleanor's for just a breath of a moment. Long enough to see the pain behind her tears. Long enough to remember another night years ago when she'd sat by a fire nursing his bullet wound, whispering prayers for him to live. She had been light back then. Now, she looked hollow, like someone whose soul was being bartered away. He turned toward the doors as laughter filled the chapel. Wade's men, half drunk and smug, slapped each other on the back. One of them yelled, "Guess the Colliers own every inch of this town now, even the women." No one corrected him. Jonas pushed through the doors into the storm. The wind hit him hard, driving sheets of rain into his coat. Lightning lit up the dusty street in harsh white flashes, the saloon sign creaking, horses stamping nervously, the world itself seeming to shake with disgust. He pulled his hat lower, jaw clenched. "Ain't right," he muttered. "Ain't right at all." Behind him, through the roaring rain, he heard the muffled sound of a door slamming shut. Then came something softer, the faint, broken sob of a woman. He stopped, boots sinking into the mud. Another sound followed, the click of a heavy lock turning somewhere behind the chapel walls. Jonas turned back, squinting through the storm. The chapel windows flickered with candlelight. Through one small pane, he saw a shadow, a man's shape looming over a smaller one. A flash of white fabric, then darkness. His hand drifted to the revolver at his hip, though he didn't draw it. Not yet. The memory of her father's face rose unbidden in his mind. Marshall Grange dying on a dirt road, blood soaking through his badge. "Promise me," the old lawman had rasped. "If ever she's in trouble, you bring her home," Jonas had promised. Then he'd left. Run from ghosts, from law, from everything. But that sound, the sob of a woman behind locked doors, felt like the past calling due. He took a long breath, the rain beating down harder, thunder rolling closer, echoing through the canyons beyond town. He could walk away again. He should. That was the smart thing. Instead, he adjusted his hat, spat into the mud, and looked up at the chapel where the candles still flickered like trapped souls. His voice came out low, almost swallowed by the storm. "Not tonight." The thunder answered him like a warning. Somewhere in the dark, a horse whinnied, sensing the violence that was coming. Jonas turned toward the saloon light glowing faintly down the street, his boots heavy in the mud. his mind already burning with the oath he'd broken and would now have to keep. Behind him, the locked door rattled once, then silence. Only the storm kept watch, howling through Dry Creek as if even the wind knew that something sacred had just been defiled, and that someone, soon enough, would make it right. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. The next ride through the Wild West is gonna be even more powerful. Rain hammered the saloon roof like 1,000 nails, each drop echoing through the dim, smoky room. Jonas Red sat alone at the bar, hat low, coat dripping on the warped floorboards. The whiskey before him barely moved, the amber light of the oil lamp above reflecting in the glass like a dying ember. He lifted it, stared into it, and saw not his own face, but the ghost of another man's, Marshall Grange, eyes fading under a desert sun. The piano in the corner played a broken tune, its notes wandering, lost like everyone who stayed too long in Dry Creek. The few patrons muttered quietly, men who'd learned to survive by looking down. The bartender, old Kip, cleaned the same glass for the 10th time, glancing up only when lightning flashed through the window and painted Jonas's scarred face in white light. "You look like a man remembering something he don't want to," Kip said, voice low and rough. Jonas didn't answer. He drank instead, the burn sliding down like liquid regret. Outside, the thunder rolled again, a reminder that the world didn't care what he'd promised or how far he'd run. His fingers brushed the inside of his coat, feeling the shape of the tarnished badge he kept hidden there. Cold metal, the last piece of the man who'd trusted him. The memory hit without mercy. A Dry Creek bed at dusk, smoke in the distance, horses gone wild, and Marshall Grange lying against a rock, blood spreading through his shirt. Jonas was younger then, reckless, still trying to prove he wasn't the outlaw everyone said he was. He remembered dropping to his knees, pressing his hands over the wound, his voice breaking. "Stay with me, Marshall. They ain't far." Grange's eyes had been calm even as the life drained out. "Ain't about me now, son. She'll be alone when I'm gone." Jonas had nodded, desperate. "You got my word. I'll look after her." Grange had smiled faintly. "Your word's all I need." His hand had reached up, placed the badge in Jonas's palm. Then his head went still. Jonas remembered burying him there in the dirt, the badge catching the last rays of the sun. He'd left Dry Creek that night, too ashamed to face the girl he'd failed to protect from the ruin that followed. Now she was grown, wearing white she never wanted, chained to a man who owned everything but his own soul. Jonas took another drink, but it didn't help. The whiskey just made the memory louder. Kip poured another shot without being asked. "You picked a hell of a night to crawl back into this pit," he muttered. Jonas looked up. "Town looks worse than I left it." "Worse?" Kip chuckled darkly. "Collier bought it clean through. The preacher, the sheriff, the damn undertaker. He owns their debts, owns their land. Only reason the church still stands is it gives him a place to gloat." He leaned closer. "You seen the bride tonight?" Jonas's jaw tightened. "I seen her," Kip sighed, shaking his head. "That girl's got the same eyes her daddy had. Brave ones, the kind that don't belong in a town like this." Jonas didn't reply. He took out the badge, placed it flat on the bar. The metal caught the lamplight, its edges worn smooth from years of being hidden. Kip's eyes widened slightly, then softened with recognition. "You still carry that?" Jonas nodded. Never knew where else to put it. The bartender's voice dropped. "You thinking of doing something stupid?" Jonas met his gaze. "Thinking of keeping my word." The piano went silent. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the shutters. Then came the sound of boots, heavy, confident. Two men stepped through the doors, rain running off their slick coats. Collier's riders, the kind who smiled without kindness. One of them dragged a young stable hand by the collar, his face bloodied, shirt torn. The taller rider threw the boy to the floorboards, where he hit hard and didn't move for a moment. "Caught this fool trying to help the lady sneak out," the man said, voice thick with drink. "Boss says he's lucky we didn't bury him next to her old man." The saloon went quiet. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. The second rider kicked the boy's ribs, then looked around the room. His eyes landed on Jonas, sizing him up. The drifter's wet coat, the revolver at his side, the way he didn't flinch. "Boss says next man who meddles gets buried under the barn," he said slowly, voice low and mean. "You understand me, stranger?" Jonas didn't blink. His hand rested on the bar just beside the badge. The lamplight trembled between them, The rider took a step closer. "I asked you a question." Jonas's reply came soft, almost gentle. "I heard you." The man smirked. "Then maybe you oughta." He never finished. Jonas's gaze cut through him like a blade, steady and cold. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Kip swallowed hard, recognizing that look. It was the look of a man who'd made peace with something dangerous inside himself. After a long pause, Jonas stood. The badge disappeared back into his coat. He tossed a coin on the counter. "For the whiskey," he said quietly. The riders watched him walk toward the door, unsure whether to stop him. The taller one muttered something, but his voice faltered when Jonas turned his head just enough to meet his eye. Lightning flashed outside as Jonas pushed through the swinging doors, stepping back into the storm. The wind howled down the empty street, carrying the sound of thunder and the faint cry of a woman from somewhere in the distance. He pulled his hat low again, his voice lost beneath the rain. "Reckon I still got a debt to pay." And with that, Jonas Red vanished into the night, the badge burning cold against his chest, and the storm following close behind. Night had fallen heavy over Collier's estate, wrapping the valley in a hush that felt more like warning than peace. The house stood on the hill like a dark cathedral, its windows flickering with the restless dance of candlelight. Inside, in the grand bridal chamber, Eleanor sat still on the edge of the bed, her white dress clinging to her skin, the lace damp where tears had touched it. The air was thick with the scent of wax and whiskey. Every flicker of flame threw shadows of gold and black across the walls, soft light masking the ugliness inside it. Wade Collier moved slow around her like a wolf pacing a trapped doe, his boots scuffed against the wooden floor, his spurs ticking like a clock counting down to something terrible. "You'll learn to be grateful," he slurred, lighting another candle, his words curling with the smoke of the match. "Most women in this county would kill for my name." Eleanor didn't answer. Her hands were clasped tightly on her lap, her wedding ring cutting faint lines into her palm. She stared at the flame nearest to her, trying to lose herself in it. But his reflection always found her, the glint of his belt buckle, the glimmer of his whiskey-soaked eyes. He unbuttoned his vest slowly, savoring his own cruelty. "You think you're better than this town," he said. "Better than me. But you're not. You're mine, Mrs. Collier." Her voice came like a ghost's whisper. "Make me feel real again," she said, her eyes unfocused, the words trembling. "Just not like this." For a heartbeat, the room went still. The flames leaned as if listening. Wade frowned, then smirked, misunderstanding her. "Real," he said, stepping closer. "You'll feel plenty real before this night's done." Outside, under the cover of rain, Jonas Red moved like a shadow through the stables. His boots made no sound on the straw, and his breath came slow and steady. The rifle on his back gleamed dully when lightning flashed through the slats of the barn wall. He could see the manor's second floor glowing faintly through the downpour, the window of her room. His heart tightened when he spotted movement inside, her silhouette framed by candlelight. He wasn't alone. A faint rustle came from behind him, and a soft voice whispered, "You came." He turned. Maria, Eleanor's maid, stood there, hair wet, hands shaking as she clutched a small brass key. "She saved me once," Maria said, her eyes wide with fear. "From him. From his father before him. Now save her." Jonas took the key, closing her hand around his for a moment.
"Get clear," he said.
"When you hear thunder twice, don't look back." Maria nodded and vanished into the darkness. Jonas waited until the lightning flashed again, then crossed the yard, his long coat whipping behind him. The rain swallowed his steps. Inside, Wade's laughter rolled like thunder itself. He had taken off his coat, his vest, and stood with the casual arrogance of a man who thought the world would never turn against him. "You know why I picked you, Ellie?" he said, his voice ugly with drink. "Because no one tells me no. Not your father. Not the law. And sure as hell not you." Eleanor lifted her head, her voice barely more than breath. "My father's law still lives," she said. He barked a laugh. "Your father's bones are dust. His law's buried with him." Her eyes flickered toward the window just for a heartbeat. Wade followed her gaze. "What are you looking at?" Before he could move, there came a sound. A small metallic click, sharp and deliberate. The sound of a hammer drawn back. Wade froze. "What in—" "Let her go," said a voice from the shadows. Jonas stepped out from behind the curtain near the far wall, dripping from the rain, his revolver steady, his face carved from stone. The candlelight caught the scar along his jaw, and in that moment the years between past and present vanished. Eleanor gasped softly. Wade's eyes narrowed and a slow, cruel grin spread across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. The gunsmith rides again. He raised his hands mockingly. "You got nerve, Red. Didn't think you'd come back here after what happened to her old man." Jonas's voice stayed calm. "You talk too much. Maybe. But I don't scare easy." Wade took a step forward, the candlelight flickering across the pistol at his hip. "You're too late, gunsmith. She's already mine." Eleanor's breath caught. She looked between them. Two men, one full of arrogance, one full of promise, and something inside her shifted. The fear drained away, replaced by something fiercer. Resolve. Jonas didn't blink. "You were never man enough to own anything worth keeping." Wade laughed, but it sounded nervous now. He glanced toward the door as if calculating whether his men might hear. "You think she'll leave with you? You think anyone in this town will take her word over mine?" Jonas's answer came steady. "Don't need their word. Just need the truth." For a moment, no one moved. The rain outside grew louder, thunder rolling far off in the hills. The candles burned low, shadows stretching long across the room. Eleanor's hands inched toward the edge of the bed, her fingertips brushing against the small silver cross her mother had once given her. Wade's grin faltered when he saw it. "Put that down," he snapped. She looked up at him, her eyes no longer trembling. "You can lock a door," she said softly, "but you can't own what don't belong to you." And in that quiet, defiant sentence, the room felt like it was holding its breath. Jonas tightened his grip on the gun. Wade's hand hovered near his belt. Lightning flashed through the window, and in its harsh white light, everything hung between salvation and ruin. The silence broke with the faintest sound. The cry of the wind, the hiss of a candle's flame flickering out. Then Wade laughed again, low and mocking, though the edge of fear had crept into his voice. "You think you can stop what's already done?" he said. "She's mine, Red. Mine to keep. Mine to break?" Eleanor stood, her eyes fixed on Jonas now, not in pleading, but in trust. "No," she said quietly. "Not anymore." The gunmetal gleamed. The flames bent and danced. And as thunder cracked overhead, the battle for Dry Creek began. Not with a bullet, but with that single word. Outside, the rain fell harder, drumming against the windows like a warning from heaven. The first gunshot split the night like a crack of judgment. Wade's revolver flashed, but the bullet buried itself in the wall an inch from Eleanor's head. She stumbled back, her hand striking the edge of a candle stand. The tall wax pillar toppled, the flame licking the velvet curtain as it fell. Smoke curled upward, lazy at first, then wild. Jonas didn't think. His revolver roared once, the echo slamming through the chamber. Wade's scream followed, high and furious. The gunman's hand blown open, the revolver clattering to the floor. The room shuddered under the storm of noise. Flames spreading fast, the air thickening with the smell of burning linen and whiskey. "Move." Jonas grabbed Eleanor's arm, pulling her toward the servants' hall. She resisted, breathless, eyes wide but steady. "He'll come after us," she said. "He already is," Jonas hissed. "We ain't got time." But Wade's voice carried through the hall, a mix of rage and pain. "You think you can take her from me? This house is mine. This land is mine." Jonas yanked Eleanor through the narrow corridor, the walls trembling as something heavy collapsed in the room behind them. Flames licked the edges of portraits, painted ancestors watching their legacy burn. The Collier name was turning to ash before their eyes. At the far end, Maria appeared out of the smoke, coughing, face streaked with soot. "The servants are out," she gasped. "But the men," he called them back. Wade's men stormed through the courtyard below, rifles glinting in the firelight. Their shadows danced like devils against the walls. Jonas shoved Eleanor toward the rear door. "We'll cut through the stables." "No." Eleanor's voice was sharp, commanding. She turned back toward the heart of the house. "No running. I want him to face what he's done." Jonas stared at her through the haze. The flickering fire turned her eyes to gold. "You'll die here. Then I'll die knowing the truth burned with him." Her defiance hit him harder than the smoke. He hesitated only a second, then nodded. "Then we end it." They moved together through the chaos, ducking under falling beams, the heat blistering their skin. The mansion had become a living thing, groaning, cracking, swallowing itself whole. By the time they reached the grand hall, the ceiling was a lattice of flame. Wade stood there in the center, blood dripping from his hand, his face lit by the inferno around him. The walls were lined with portraits of collier men, grim, unyielding faces that now seemed to watch his downfall. "You should have run, Red," Wade spat, his voice hoarse. "No one will believe a word out of her mouth." "She's my wife. The law sees her as my property." Jonas didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. It hit the floor between them with a dull thud. "What's that?" Wade snarled. "Truth," Jonas said. "From a man better than you'll ever be." Wade kicked the pouch open. Inside was a stack of yellowed papers, sealed and signed in old ink. The Collier family crest gleamed faintly through soot. Wade's eyes widened as he read the first line. His father's confession, written years before his death. Theft, forgery, murder of rivals. Every sin that had built the Collier empire laid bare in that trembling script. "Maria kept it," Jonas said. "Your father gave it to her before he died. Said someday you'd need reminding what kind of man you came from." "You lie." Jonas's voice was flat. "You know I don't." Wade lunged for the papers, but Eleanor was faster. Her hand trembled as she leveled Jonas's revolver, the barrel glinting through the smoke. "Don't," she said. He froze, chest heaving. "You wouldn't." She steadied the gun with both hands. "You made me nothing. You called me yours. Now I take myself back," he sneered, stepping forward. "You can't even pull the trigger." Her finger tightened. The shot shattered a whiskey lamp behind him and fire erupted across the wall. The banner of the Collier crest went up in flames. Wade stumbled, blinded by smoke and light, cursing as the fire spread around him. Jonas grabbed Eleanor's wrist. "We have to go now." She hesitated only a moment, watching as Wade stumbled beneath the collapsing chandelier. His scream was swallowed by the roar of the blaze. Then she let Jonas pull her through the side door. They tore down the servants' hall through waves of heat and falling embers. The wallpaper peeled away like skin. Jonas shielded Eleanor as a beam came crashing down, sparks flying across his coat. The world narrowed to flame and breath, the sound of destruction chasing them every step. They burst through the back doors into the cool night air. Rain hissed as it struck the burning roof. The entire house was an inferno now, orange and gold against the dawn sky. Maria ran toward them from the stables. "The horses!" she shouted. Jonas helped Eleanor mount one, his own body shaking from exhaustion. The fire cast their shadows long across the yard. Behind them, the mansion groaned once more, then collapsed inward, a sea of sparks leaping into the dawn. Eleanor turned in the saddle, her face streaked with ash. "It's over," she whispered. Jonas looked at her, the fire reflected in his gray eyes. "No," he said quietly. "It's just begun." From down the hill came the sound of hoofbeats. Uniformed men appeared through the smoke. Sheriff Dugan and his posse, rifles raised. Jonas's stomach turned. The sheriff's eyes glimmered coldly under his hat brim. "Well now," he drawled. "Seems we caught ourselves a couple of arsonists." Wade's men, the ones who'd escaped the blaze, rode in behind them, bruised but eager. "That's them," one shouted. "They burned the house." Eleanor's voice was steady. "He tried to kill me." The sheriff tipped his hat. "You're Mrs. Collier, ma'am. Man's own wife accusing him of murder while his body's still smoking. Folks might take that wrong." Jonas's hand hovered near his gun. The odds weren't good. 6 rifles, maybe more in the tree line. He could feel Eleanor's breath beside him, quick but fearless. "Sheriff," Jonas said, "you know who paid you last?" The older man smiled faintly. "Money's money, Red, but a Collier name carries weight. You two best come quiet." Eleanor looked past the rifles, past the lawmen who'd long ago sold their souls, and said in a voice that didn't waver, "Then let's see whose word weighs more." The dawn wind blew hard, carrying the ash of the Collier estate across the plains. Somewhere in that gray rain of dust, justice waited, uncertain but closer than it had ever been. The morning broke harsh and gray over Dry Creek, the air thick with the smell of smoke and judgment. The Collier ranch still burned on the horizon, black plumes twisting upward like the ghosts of all the lies that had kept this town in chains. In the square beneath the hanging sign of the old general store, Eleanor Grange and Jonas Red stood shackled side by side. The iron cuffs bit into their wrists, but they didn't flinch. Around them, the townsfolk gathered in uneasy silence. Shopkeepers, ranch hands, widows with shawls pulled tight against the chill. No one dared speak, not while the sheriff stood watching with his hand resting on his pistol. Across from them, Wade Collier stumbled into the light. His fine clothes were torn and blackened, one arm bound in a sling. The right side of his face was a map of burns and rage. He leaned against one of his men for balance, but his voice carried clear and sharp. "They tried to kill me," he rasped. "Set fire to my family home. Shot my men, stole from me, and now they stand here playing the victim." His eyes fixed on Eleanor, and something like satisfaction flickered there. "Tell him, darling. Tell him how you begged me to marry you, how you wanted the Collier name, or maybe you'd rather they hear what you did after you got it." Eleanor said nothing. Her gaze stayed on the dust beneath her boots. The sheriff spat into the dirt and turned to Jonas. "You got any words before I send for the judge?" "Won't take long to hang a drifter and a liar." Jonas lifted his head slowly, the wind tugging at his coat. His gray eyes met the sheriff's with a calm that made the lawman uneasy. "Yeah," he said. "I got a few." He took a step forward, the chains clinking at his wrists. "You all know what he's done. You just stopped looking." His voice carried low but steady, cutting through the mutters of the crowd. "This man and his kin built their name on blood and theft. You think that house burned by accident? No, it burned because truth finally found a match." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Wade's laughter broke it. "Truth," he spat. "What do you know about truth? You're just a vagrant with a gun and a story." Jonas reached into his coat pocket, slow, deliberate. The deputies raised their rifles, but he ignored them. From the inside of his charred coat, he pulled a small, half-burned leather pouch. He tossed it onto the ground between them. The flap fell open. Inside, the folded sheets were blackened at the edges, but the red wax seal still held. The crowd leaned closer. "What's that?" the sheriff asked. "Your proof," Jonas said. "Signed by his father himself." The sheriff bent down, tore the seal, and unfolded the papers. Even from where they stood, the signature was clear. Silas Collier. Below it, the confession told everything. Murders, forged land deeds, the bribes that had bought the sheriff's own badge. For a long moment, no one moved. Only the wind spoke, whispering through the dust and smoke. Wade shook his head, laughing weakly. "That's a fake. My old man never—" But old Kip's voice rose from the edge of the crowd, cracked but strong. "That paper's the truth. I seen him forge those deeds myself, back when I worked his books. Man stole half the valley right out from under folks too poor to fight him." Heads turned. Another voice followed, Mrs. Dalton, her hands trembling. "He took our land after my husband died. Said we owed back taxes. We didn't owe a damn cent." Then more voices joined in. A miner, a ranch hand, a store clerk. Years of fear broke like a dam, spilling the words that had waited too long to be spoken. The crowd shifted, murmurs turning to anger. Wade's face twisted. "You shut your mouths. Every last one of you owes me your livin'." Jonas took another step forward, his chains scraping the ground. "No," he said quietly. "They owed you their silence. Not anymore." Wade's good hand went to his pistol. His movements were slow, jerky, the fingers still bandaged from the night before. "You think this changes anything? You think they'll follow her? A woman who burned her husband's house to the ground?" Eleanor finally looked up. The light caught the streak of soot along her cheek, the faint shimmer of tears that had long since dried into resolve. "You made me feel less than real," she said softly. "Now I'll make sure everyone sees who you really are." Before anyone could move, Wade drew his pistol. The metal flashed, but Eleanor was faster. Jonas saw the flicker of her arm, heard the clean thunder of the shot. Wade staggered, eyes wide, the weapon slipping from his hand. He looked down as if surprised to find blood blooming across his chest. Then he fell forward into the dust, the sound hollow and final. Silence followed, deep as a grave. The smoke from the burning ranch drifted over the town like a shroud. Eleanor stood frozen, the gun still raised, the chain between her wrists dangling. Her face was calm, unreadable. The sheriff stared at Wade's body, at the blood seeping into the ground, then at the confession still fluttering in his hand. Slowly, he holstered his gun. The crowd waited. Jonas turned his head toward him. "So what's it gonna be, Sheriff?" The old lawman looked at the paper one more time, at the red wax melted half away, the ink running where rain had touched it. Something broke in his eyes, years of corruption crumbling under the weight of shame. He walked over to Jonas and Eleanor. For a moment it seemed he might raise his weapon. Instead, he reached up and unclipped his badge. He looked at it long and hard, then dropped it into the dust at Jonas's feet. "This town's yours to rebuild." he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. The crowd stayed silent as Jonas bent down, picking up the badge. The metal was warm from the sun, heavy with meaning. He looked at it, then at Eleanor. She met his eyes, exhaustion and fire both flickering there. Around them, the people began to move, first slowly, then with purpose. Someone untied the chains. Someone else helped cover Wade's body. Old Kip started sweeping the dust where the blood had fallen. No one spoke, but something unseen shifted in the air, like the town itself was taking its first breath in years. Jonas slipped the badge into his coat. "Guess we got work to do," he murmured. Eleanor nodded. Her voice was low, steady. "Then let's start with truth." The wind rose again, carrying away the last of the smoke. In its place came sunlight, soft and gold, spilling across the square and the faces of the people who had finally chosen to look. Weeks later, sunlight poured down over Dry Creek for the first time in months without a trace of ash in the sky. The old chapel, once half broken and abandoned, stood tall again on the ridge. Its bell, long silent since the collier men bought the land, rang soft in the wind. The doors were open, letting the morning spill across polished wood and rows of rebuilt pews. The scent of new pine mixed with the faint sweetness of candle wax. Inside, the townsfolk filled the benches. No one whispered, no one fidgeted. They just watched as Eleanor Grange stood before the altar in a plain blue dress, her hair tied back, her hand steady as she struck a match and lit a single candle. The flame danced, small and sure. She spoke quietly, but every word carried. "For every woman who thought she'd never be free again," she said, her voice trembling, "and for every man who remembered what right really means." The crowd bowed their heads. Some wept openly. Wives who had hidden bruises behind smiles, men who had once looked away when injustice walked by. The light from the candle seemed to grow, filling the chapel, bouncing off the gold cross that had survived the years of rot and neglect. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting gold over the town square, where the collier crest had once hung. In its place now stood a wooden post bearing the Marshal's Star of Dry Creek, a new badge, a clean start. Jonas Red sat tall in the saddle, watching from the edge of the street. The star gleamed faintly on his chest. It wasn't the kind of shine that drew pride. It was heavy, like the memory of promises kept too late. He turned his horse toward Boot Hill, the wind tugging at his coat as he rode slow up the dirt path lined with white stones. The hill overlooked the town, and the town looked better for once. The saloon had new glass in its windows. Children played where guns had fired. Even the old mine road had wagons again, hauling supplies instead of bodies. For the first time, Dry Creek felt like it belonged to the people who lived in it. Jonas stopped at the top of the hill where the grass swayed over rows of simple wooden markers. He dismounted and walked among them, hat in hand. The graves stretched in quiet lines, miners, ranchers, nameless drifters. And then, near the center, one stood out. The wood was freshly carved, the name etched with care, Eleanor Grange Collier. Beneath it, in smaller letters, "She lived true." Jonas knelt beside it, tracing the carving with his fingers. "You didn't die here," he murmured. "Not really." The truth was, she hadn't. She'd left 2 weeks after the trial, riding south at dawn before most of the town had woken. She'd said she needed to start fresh, somewhere her name didn't echo with pain, but she left the grave behind anyway, a marker to bury what she'd endured, to let her old self rest in the same dust that once held her prisoner. Jonas smiled faintly, remembering her words before she left. "This town don't need a ghost, Jonas. It needs a future. Promise me you'll make one." He'd promised. Now he stood there, the breeze tugging at his coat, watching the sun catch on the iron letters. "You did more than live true," he whispered. "You made the rest of us remember how." From below, the sound of a hammer echoed, men rebuilding a storefront, laughter rising between strikes. A woman's voice sang somewhere down the street, a tune light as air. The smell of fresh bread drifted up the hill. Dry Creek was alive again, beating steady after years of silence. Jonas rose, dusted his hands, and walked back to his horse. The animal snorted softly, shaking its mane. He mounted up, taking one last look at the grave. "Reckon you got what you wanted," he said. Light came back. He turned the horse toward the horizon. The sun was low, painting the plains in amber. Dust lifted beneath the hooves, swirling in a golden cloud. For a moment, the world glowed as if heaven had leaned down to touch the earth. The wind carried faint sounds, the laughter from town, the ring of the chapel bell, and something else, softer still, her voice. "You made me feel real again." Jonas closed his eyes, letting the wind carry the words through him. When he opened them, the hills stretched out endless before him, wild, free, and waiting. He tipped his hat low and nudged the horse forward, riding toward the horizon where the light burned brightest. Behind him, Dry Creek shimmered under the fading sun. The chapel candle still flickered inside its walls, refusing to die out even as the day ended. The bell chimed once more, clear and true, carrying across the valley. By nightfall, the town would sleep easy. Its ghosts had been buried, its debts paid, its name reborn, and somewhere beyond the ridge, as the first stars blinked awake, a man rode on beneath the endless western sky, the dust behind him glowing like gold in the last light of day. The sun set slow and solemn over Dry Creek, no longer cursed, but blessed by all that had survived. If you rode with me till the end, partner, hit that subscribe button and join this trail for more tales of justice, love, and redemption under the western sun, 'cause out here, every ending's just the start of another ride.